There's a man named Richard who eats lunch at the same diner in suburban Ohio every Tuesday and Thursday. He orders the same thing each time: a turkey club sandwich, a cup of coffee, and a slice of whatever pie they made that morning. The bill comes to $14.30. He tips $5, pays in cash, and drives home in a 2012 Honda Accord with a small dent on the rear bumper. The waitress who served him for 6 years assumes he's a retired factory worker living on a pension. He wears flannel shirts. His watch is a basic Timex. He's never once mentioned money, investments, or anything that would suggest financial sophistication. Richard has a net worth of $11.4 million. He built a manufacturing business over 30 years, sold it in 2019 for $8.2 million after taxes, and has watched his investments grow since then. His house is paid off. His children's college funds were fully funded a decade ago. He could buy the diner if he wanted to. Nobody who sees Richard in public would ever guess. That's entirely intentional. 3 blocks from that diner, there's a 41-year-old named Marcus who drives a leased BMW M4. His watch is a Tag Heuer that cost $4,200. His sneakers are limited edition Jordans. His Instagram features photos from expensive restaurants, resort vacations, and bottle service at clubs. Marcus earns $138,000 annually as a regional sales manager. His net worth is negative $23,000. Between his car lease, his credit card debt, and the personal loan he took to renovate his condo, he owes more than he owns. His retirement account has $19,000 in it. He's 41 years old. Everyone who sees Marcus assumes he's wealthy. That assumption is exactly what Marcus needs them to believe. These two men represent opposite ends of a spectrum that most people misunderstand completely. The visible markers of wealth, the cars, the clothes, the watches, the vacations, are not indicators of actual wealth. They're indicators of spending. Spending and wealth are not only different, they're often inversely correlated. The more someone spends on looking wealthy, the less capital they have to actually become wealthy. Real wealth is invisible. It sits in brokerage accounts, retirement funds, business equity, and paid-off assets that don't announce themselves. The people who have it rarely display it. The people who display it rarely have it. Today, I'm going to walk you through 15 signs that someone is actually wealthy, not performing wealth for social approval. These markers are counterintuitive because they contradict everything popular culture teaches about what rich people look like. But they're validated by decades of research into millionaire behavior, and they reveal something important about how wealth actually accumulates. Understanding these signs won't just help you identify who around you might be quietly wealthy. It will show you the behaviors and mindsets that create wealth in the first place. The signs aren't random. They're symptoms of a specific relationship with money that produces dramatically different outcomes than the relationship most people have. Before I walk through the specific signs, let me establish the research foundation that explains why visible wealth and actual wealth diverge so dramatically. Thomas Stanley and William Danko spent over 20 years studying millionaires across America. Their research, published in The Millionaire Next Door and subsequent studies, shattered assumptions about what wealthy people look like. They found that 80% of American millionaires are first-generation wealthy. They didn't inherit their money. They built it themselves through decades of disciplined behavior. They found that the typical millionaire lives in a middle-class neighborhood, not an affluent enclave. They drive Toyotas, Hondas, and Fords more often than BMWs and Mercedes. They've lived in the same house for over 20 years on average. They shop at Costco and Target, not Neiman Marcus. Most importantly, they found that high income and high net worth are not the same thing. Many high earners are what Stanley called UAWs, under-accumulators of wealth. They earn substantial salaries but spend everything they make on lifestyle. Meanwhile, many moderate earners are PAWs, prodigious accumulators of wealth. They earn middle-class incomes but consistently save and invest the difference between what they earn and what they need. A 2025 study from Ramsey Solutions surveyed over 10,000 millionaires and found similar patterns. 94% of millionaires still live on less than they make. 73% have never carried a credit card balance. The top 3 car brands driven by millionaires are Toyota, Honda, and Ford. The research is consistent and overwhelming. The people who look wealthy and the people who are wealthy are largely separate populations. The overlap is smaller than anyone assumes. Understanding this divergence is essential for interpreting the signs that follow. Each sign reflects the behaviors and values that create wealth, which are fundamentally different from the behaviors and values that create the appearance of wealth. Number 1. They drive an unremarkable car that's several years old. The single most reliable external indicator of hidden wealth is an ordinary vehicle that the owner has driven for many years. According to Experian automotive data, 61% of people earning over $250,000 annually drive Toyotas, Hondas, or Fords, not luxury brands. Reliable, practical vehicles that depreciate slowly and cost little to maintain. The median vehicle price paid by millionaires is $31,367, according to Ramsey Solutions research. That's below the average new car transaction price in America, which exceeded $48,000 in 2025. Wealthy people understand the math of vehicle ownership in ways that aspirational spenders don't. A new luxury car loses 20 to 30% of its value in the first year alone. A $55,000 BMW becomes a $38,000 BMW in 12 months. The owner has lost $17,000 in depreciation while also paying higher insurance, higher maintenance costs, and potentially interest on an auto loan. That same person could have bought a 3-year-old Toyota Camry for $22,000, driven it for 5 years with minimal depreciation, and invested the $33,000 difference. At 8% returns over 20 years, that $33,000 becomes approximately $154,000. When you see someone driving an older, practical car that's clearly paid off, you might be looking at someone far wealthier than the person in the least luxury SUV next to them. Number 2, they rarely talk about money, but ask a lot of questions about what you do. People who are building or have built real wealth tend to be genuinely curious about how things work. They ask questions about your job, your industry, your challenges, and your insights. They listen more than they talk. What they don't do is volunteer information about their own finances. They don't mention their investments, their income, or their assets. They don't name drop expensive purchases or hint at their net worth. This pattern exists for several reasons. First, wealthy people have learned that talking about money changes relationships. It creates envy, expectation, and awkwardness. The person who advertises their wealth invites requests for loans, investments in business ideas, and a subtle shift in how others perceive them. Second, wealthy people don't need external validation from financial discussions. Their security comes from actual assets, not from others knowing about those assets. Marcus, the sales manager driving the leased BMW, needs people to perceive him as successful because his actual financial position doesn't provide that security internally. Third, genuinely wealthy people are often still learning. They became wealthy partly by paying attention and absorbing information. They're more interested in what they can learn from a conversation than in what they can signal through it. If someone steers every conversation toward money, investments, or expensive things they own or plan to buy, they're probably performing wealth rather than possessing it. Number 3, they wear the same simple clothes repeatedly. Mark Zuckerberg wears the same gray t-shirt in most public appearances. Steve Jobs was famous for his black turtleneck and jeans uniform. Warren Buffett has worn essentially the same style of suit for decades. This isn't coincidence or eccentricity. It's a pattern that emerges when people optimize for outcomes rather than perception. Wealthy people often develop what researchers call a personal uniform, a set of simple, quality clothes that they wear repeatedly without concern for whether others notice the repetition. They've opted out of the fashion signaling game entirely. Research from The Millionaire Next Door found that the typical millionaire has never paid more than $399 for a suit and has never paid more than $140 for a pair of shoes. These numbers are from the 1990s, but even inflation adjusted, they represent modest spending compared to what people assume wealthy individuals spend on clothing. The person cycling through designer outfits and new purchases every season is spending thousands annually on depreciation. Clothes lose most of their value the moment you wear them. The wealthy person wearing the same quality basics year after year has redirected those thousands into assets that appreciate rather than depreciate. When you see someone wearing simple, unremarkable clothes without apparent concern for fashion trends, you might be looking at someone who's decided that building wealth matters more than displaying style. Number 4, they own their home outright or carry a very small mortgage. One of the clearest markers of genuine wealth is the absence of housing debt. According to Federal Reserve data, approximately 38% of American homeowners own their homes free and clear. But among millionaires, that percentage is dramatically higher. Ramsey Solutions found that 67% of millionaires live in homes with paid-off mortgages. The math behind this priority is straightforward. A $350,000 mortgage at 7% interest over 30 years costs a total of $838,000 in payments. The homeowner pays $488,000 in interest, nearly 1.5 times the original loan amount. Wealthy people find paying that interest viscerally painful. They prioritize eliminating mortgage debt because they understand that interest paid is compound growth working against them rather than for them. You won't know if someone owns their home outright by looking at the house, but if you ask questions about their financial priorities and they mention paying off their mortgage early, or if they casually reference not having a mortgage payment, you're likely talking to someone with more wealth than their visible lifestyle suggests. Number 5, they take modest vacations or travel off-peak. The way someone travels reveals their financial priorities more clearly than almost any other discretionary spending category. People performing wealth take highly visible vacations to impressive destinations during peak seasons. They stay at resorts that photograph well for social media. They fly business class. The trip is partly about the experience and partly about the signal it sends. People with actual wealth often take modest vacations or travel strategically to get better value. They visit national parks instead of all-inclusive resorts. They travel in shoulder seasons when prices drop and crowds thin. They might fly economy on a discounted fare and put the savings into their investment accounts. The difference in cost between a performative vacation and a strategic vacation can easily exceed $5,000 for a family of 4. Over 20 years of annual vacations, that's $100,000 in spending difference. Invested at 8% returns, that $100,000 becomes approximately $494,000. Wealthy people don't avoid travel. They avoid overpaying for experiences that deliver similar satisfaction at lower cost. When someone describes vacations focused on experiences rather than luxury signaling, they're often revealing a relationship with money that builds wealth rather than depletes it. Number 6, they have a boring investment strategy they never change. Ask someone with performative wealth about their investments, and you'll hear about individual stocks, cryptocurrency positions, options trades, and alternative assets. They're always active, always adjusting, always chasing the next opportunity. Ask someone with actual wealth about their investments, and you'll often hear something boring. Low-cost index funds, diversified allocation, automatic contributions, rebalancing once a year. They've been doing the same thing for decades and plan to continue. Research consistently shows that passive, boring investment strategies outperform active, exciting strategies over long periods. The average actively managed mutual fund underperforms its benchmark index after fees. The average individual investor underperforms the market by attempting to time entries and exits. Wealthy people have internalized this research. They've accepted that getting rich slowly through disciplined, boring investing beats getting rich quickly through clever trading. They don't have interesting investment stories because interesting usually means risky, and risky usually means underperformance over time. When someone dismisses questions about investments with, "I just buy index funds and leave them alone," they might sound unsophisticated. They're often wealthier than the person with the exciting portfolio story. Number 7. They know the price of things ordinary people buy regularly. Here's a counterintuitive marker that reveals more than you'd expect. Wealthy people who built their wealth through discipline typically know the cost of groceries, gasoline, and everyday goods. They notice when prices increase. They compare options. They use coupons or buy in bulk at Costco. People performing wealth often have no idea what things cost because paying attention to prices conflicts with their self-image. Caring about the price of milk feels beneath someone trying to project affluence. So they don't track, don't compare, don't optimize. This difference in awareness extends beyond cost consciousness. The wealthy person who knows that eggs cost $4.60 a dozen maintains a general awareness of money flowing through their life. The performing person who waves away price questions has lost touch with the fundamental mechanics of spending. Warren Buffett still clips coupons. Sam Walton, founder of Walmart, drove an old pickup truck and haggled over prices. The wealthiest people in history maintained frugal habits not because they needed to, but because those habits were part of how they built wealth in the first place. When someone who appears modest demonstrates detailed knowledge of everyday prices, you might be looking at someone who became wealthy precisely because they never stopped paying attention. Number 8, they take forever to make major purchase decisions. Impulse buying is one of the strongest predictors of financial struggle. Deliberate purchasing is one of the strongest predictors of wealth accumulation. Wealthy people often take weeks or months to make significant purchase decisions. They research extensively. They compare options. They wait for sales. They sleep on decisions multiple times. They ask whether the purchase aligns with their values and priorities. This deliberation isn't about being cheap. It's about ensuring that spending is intentional rather than emotional. The wealthy person who takes 3 months to decide on a new refrigerator has tested their desire against time. If they still want it after 3 months, the purchase is probably aligned with genuine needs rather than momentary impulse. Research on millionaire behavior shows that this deliberation extends to all categories. Wealthy people comparison shop for insurance. They negotiate on major purchases. They read contracts carefully. They ask questions that feel uncomfortable in sales situations. The person who makes purchase decisions quickly to project decisiveness or affluence is often spending money they shouldn't spend on things they don't need. The person who deliberates extensively is often building wealth through thousands of small decisions that compound over decades. Number 9, they avoid discussing their specific net worth or income. If someone volunteers their net worth or income in conversation, they're almost certainly not as wealthy as they're implying. Genuine wealth creates what researchers call financial contentment. The person knows they're secure. They don't need others to know. Sharing specific numbers serves no purpose except signaling, and signaling is something wealthy people have typically outgrown. The pattern is consistent across income levels. A person earning $150,000 who volunteers that number is usually trying to impress. A person earning $400,000 who deflects questions about income has nothing to prove. This extends to how people discuss investments. The genuinely wealthy person might mention that they invest regularly without specifying amounts. The performing person drops specific numbers. I just put another $50,000 into crypto. My portfolio is up 30% this year. The specificity is the tell. When numbers get specific, the motivation has shifted from conversation to performance. Number 10, they have multiple streams of income but don't mention them. Wealthy people rarely rely on a single source of income. They have investment income, rental income, business income, dividends, interest, and often side businesses or consulting arrangements. But they don't advertise these income streams, partly for privacy, partly because explaining multiple income sources invites questions about tax strategies, time management, and other topics they'd rather not discuss, partly because the side income often seems modest relative to their overall wealth and isn't worth mentioning. Research from Thomas Stanley found that the average millionaire has at least 3 streams of income. Many have 5 or more. But in conversation, they might identify themselves by a single profession without mentioning the rental properties, the investment portfolio, the royalties from a book written years ago, or the small business they own with a partner. When someone describes their work situation simply, despite having had decades to develop complexity, they're often understating their financial position. Number 11. They have strong relationships with service providers who've known them for years. Wealthy people tend to develop long-term relationships with accountants, attorneys, financial advisors, insurance agents, and other service providers. They've worked with the same professionals for a decade or more. They maintain these relationships carefully. This pattern reflects several wealth-building behaviors. First, wealthy people understand the value of professional expertise. They're willing to pay for competent advice rather than trying to handle complex matters themselves. Second, wealthy people think long-term. They don't switch service providers for marginal savings. They value the relationship, the accumulated knowledge about their situation, and the trust built over years. Third, wealthy people have enough financial complexity to warrant these relationships. Someone with substantial assets needs a good accountant. Someone with significant estate planning needs a good attorney. The need for professional services scales with wealth. If someone mentions their accountant or attorney by name, references advice they received years ago that proved valuable, or demonstrates a network of professional relationships, they're often wealthier than their visible lifestyle suggests. Number 12. They're generous in ways that don't draw attention. Research on millionaire giving patterns shows that wealthy people donate significantly to charity and help others financially, but they typically do so quietly. They might pay for a relative's education without telling anyone outside the immediate family. They might donate to local organizations without seeking recognition. They might tip generously without making a show of it. The generosity exists, the performance doesn't. This contrasts sharply with performative wealth, where visible generosity serves as another signal. Buying bottle service for the table, making donations that get your name on a plaque, helping friends in ways that ensure everyone knows about it. The wealthy person tips the waitress $5 on a $14 lunch. Nobody sees it except the waitress. The generous act happens quietly, repeatedly, without acknowledgement. When you observe someone being quietly generous in small ways, when the tip is large, the offer to help is genuine, the contribution happens without fanfare, you're often seeing wealth expressed through values rather than displayed through consumption. Number 13. They express genuine contentment with what they have. One of the most reliable markers of actual wealth is the absence of expressed desire for more stuff. People performing wealth talk constantly about what they want next, the car they're planning to buy, the vacation they're going to take, the house they're hoping to upgrade to, the watch they've been eyeing. There's always a next purchase on the horizon because the current purchases haven't provided the satisfaction they were supposed to deliver. People with actual wealth often express contentment with their current possessions. Their car is fine, their house is comfortable, their clothes are adequate. They're not looking forward to the next acquisition because they've learned that acquisitions don't produce lasting satisfaction. This contentment isn't complacency. Wealthy people are often highly driven in their work and investments, but they've decoupled satisfaction from consumption. Their drive is directed toward building rather than buying. When someone deflects questions about future purchases with genuine statements of satisfaction, "I'm happy with my car, my house works well for us, I have everything I need," they've often achieved a financial position that purchasing more wouldn't improve. Number 14. They understand taxes at a level that surprises you. Wealthy people develop sophisticated knowledge of tax strategy because taxes represent one of their largest expenses. They know the difference between long-term and short-term capital gains rates. They understand Roth conversion strategies. They're familiar with qualified opportunity zones, donor-advised funds, and depreciation schedules for rental properties. They can discuss tax loss harvesting, estate tax exemptions, and the timing of income recognition. This knowledge develops naturally when you have significant assets and work with tax professionals over many years. The more wealth you accumulate, the more you learn about protecting and optimizing it. People without significant assets rarely develop this knowledge because it doesn't apply to their situation. They know the basics: standard deduction, tax brackets, maybe retirement contribution limits. When someone demonstrates unexpectedly sophisticated tax knowledge in casual conversation, they've often spent years managing wealth that required that knowledge. Number 15. They talk about financial independence in terms of time, not money. This final sign is perhaps the most revealing. People performing wealth talk about money in terms of amounts. They want to earn a certain salary, they want to accumulate a certain net worth. The goal is a number. People with actual wealth talk about money in terms of time. They think about when they could retire if they chose to. They calculate how many years of expenses they have saved. They measure wealth in freedom rather than figures. This shift in framing happens when someone achieves a financial position where the numbers become abstract. Once you have more than you need for a comfortable life, additional accumulation matters less. What matters is what the money enables. Freedom from mandatory work. Freedom to pursue interests without financial pressure. Freedom to help family members. Freedom to weather any crisis without stress. When someone discusses finances in terms of choices and time, rather than amounts and accumulation, they've usually achieved a level of wealth that made the shift natural. Let me give you specific guidance on what these signs actually reveal. If you're trying to identify who around you might be secretly wealthy, look for clusters of these behaviors rather than individual signs. Any single sign could be coincidence. Multiple signs appearing together suggests a genuine pattern of wealth-building behavior. More importantly, recognize what these signs teach about how wealth actually accumulates. The behaviors aren't random, they're causal. The person who drives an older car has more money to invest because they're not making car payments. The person who deliberates on purchases spends less impulsively. The person who understands taxes optimizes their financial position. Each behavior contributes to wealth accumulation directly. If you want to build wealth yourself, these signs become a checklist of behaviors to adopt rather than people to identify. Drive a practical car. Wear simple clothes. Avoid talking about money. Take modest vacations. Develop a boring investment strategy. Deliberate on major purchases. Learn about taxes. The behaviors that hide wealth are the same behaviors that create wealth. The secrecy isn't incidental to the wealth. It's part of the same value system that produced it. Richard, the millionaire eating his turkey club at the Ohio diner, didn't set out to appear middle class. He set out to build wealth. The modest appearance was a byproduct of choices that prioritized substance over signal. Every dollar he didn't spend on luxury cars went into investments. Every year he didn't upgrade his lifestyle was a year that compound interest worked in his favor. Every conversation he didn't dominate with financial boasting preserved relationships built on genuine connection rather than impressed distance. Marcus, the sales manager with the least BMW and negative net worth, made opposite choices. He prioritized perception over position. He optimized for how things looked rather than how they actually were. He'll reach his 50s having spent 30 years performing wealth instead of building it. The difference between these two men isn't income. Marcus earns a good living. The difference is what they did with that income. One converted earnings into assets. The other converted earnings into appearances. This distinction between building wealth and displaying wealth is the most important financial concept that most people never understand. It's not complicated. It doesn't require sophisticated financial instruments or advanced investment strategies. It requires clarity about what money is actually for and discipline in directing money toward that purpose. The 15 signs I've described today all trace back to this fundamental distinction. Each sign represents someone who chose building over displaying, substance over signal, long-term security over short-term impression. The person who understands this distinction behaves differently without effort. The boring car, the simple clothes, the modest vacation, the quiet generosity, these aren't sacrifices for them. They're natural expressions of values that prioritize wealth over the appearance of wealth. The person who doesn't understand this distinction will struggle with every financial decision. They'll feel tension between saving and spending, between investing and consuming, between security and status. That tension exhausts willpower and often resolves in favor of spending because the immediate reward of appearing successful beats the distant reward of actually being successful. This is why financial literacy matters more than any tactical advice about specific investments or budgeting methods. Financial literacy isn't about knowing which index fund to buy. It's about understanding the principles that govern how wealth actually accumulates, principles that have remained constant across every economic environment and will remain constant regardless of what happens in markets or politics. The wealthy person eating lunch at the diner didn't become wealthy through secret knowledge or special access. He became wealthy through consistent application of principles that are available to anyone. Save more than you spend, invest the difference, avoid lifestyle inflation, think in decades rather than months, prioritize freedom over impression. These principles aren't taught in school. They're rarely modeled in media or popular culture, which celebrates visible consumption rather than invisible accumulation. They have to be learned deliberately, often through resources that most people never seek out because they don't realize what they're missing. If you found yourself recognizing the gap between your current financial behaviors and the behaviors I've described today, that recognition is the starting point. There's a video on this channel that breaks down financial literacy from the foundation. Not which stocks to pick, but how money actually works, how wealth compounds, how the gap between income and spending determines everything that follows. It's where I'd point anyone who wants to move from the Marcus category to the Richard category. The difference between Richard and Marcus will compound for another 20 years. Richard's wealth will grow. Marcus's debt will persist. The gap between them will widen not because of what happens in the economy or the market, but because of the daily choices each man makes based on his understanding of what money is actually for. You get to choose which trajectory you're on. The 15 signs aren't just interesting observations about how to spot hidden wealth. They're a roadmap for building it. Each sign points to a behavior that compounds. Each behavior reflects a principle that works regardless of income level or starting point. The wealthy person hiding in plain sight doesn't look like what you expected. That mismatch between expectation and reality is the most important financial lesson available. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you understand it, you can start building differently. The Turkey Club costs $14.30. The wisdom costs nothing. The choice is yours.